Welcome, Bitcoiners. The sun super duper up. Bitcoin running fine. So, all that's left to do is have a coffee and talk about what is new. I got Justin in the house this morning. What's up, Justin? How you doing, man? We got Rickster Swickster. We got LMH. Right? Gonna find it is indeed a fine morning. It was particularly orange, the sunrise this morning for me. Particularly colorful. I enjoyed it. I drank a coffee and let the red light shine on me early this morning. Good morning, PV. Morning, Joe. Morning, McTimmy. Morning, David. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, P-Man Van. Good morning, Pud. Good morning, Bud. I almost said Bud and Bud Perry together. Pardon me. Bud. Good morning, everyone. So, as you know, we like to start the day with the fakest news we can find. It's hard to beat yesterday. There was so much, but we got some good ones today. We got some really, really good ones. This is a warning to all women out there. This is from the Daily Mail. A warning to women who have children in their early 20s. You might be more at risk of a heart attack or stroke, according to the experts. According to the experts. So if you're a woman and really young, you got heart problems, apparently. That's what they say, right? And the woman who wrote it is named Kate Pickles. No kidding. Kate Pickles. That's really her name. The Economist also has whipped up a new confusing context here. So this is what they say is going on in Britain, right? There's a lot going on in Britain. We're going to talk a bit about Britain today, but this is what they say is captured the attention of the country. Our mother who art in heaven. And here's the headline. God's pronouns are causing conniptions in Britain. Anglicans are debating whether he should be he, him, or she, her, or something else, rightly. Well, I got a tip. The Daily Wire, they just came out with Jeremy's chocolates. Remember Jeremy's razors for woke shaving people who boycotted the Daily Wire? Well, they came up with new chocolate because Hershey is doing the same thing. They're getting pretty woke and they don't want to sponsor people and all that. So the Daily Wire has come up with 2 chocolate bars. And this is just some advice for God, if you want to know what's going on. So they've got the she-her chocolate bar, and that's without nuts. And then they've got the he-him chocolate bar, and that has nuts. That's it. That's all you got to know, right? Chocolate bars, pronouns, it's all there. The fallout of Russell Brand's appearance in U.S. media last week. So here's what happened. Russell Brand came for a Rumble Fest, I guess, last weekend. And I saw some pictures from the event. It was a bunch of content creators. I know some of them, and some of them were taking selfies with Russell. He was there. They were somewhere down south, somewhere it looked warm. I didn't ask where they were, but it was a whole series of Rumble content creators. And from there, Russell went on the Joe Rogan show. He went on the Tim Pool show. And finally, he made a turn on Bill Maher's Real Time on HBO on Friday night. And that's where the real bombshells happened. And if you didn't see it yet, we talked about it immediately on this show Saturday morning. It was a knockout punch on that moron who wrote the book Game Changer years ago and who is a political commentator. And you can see why you can't really leave some of these low IQ individuals from the mainstream media into the ring with higher IQ individuals, especially those with an IQ high enough to be funny. Because Russell Brand pounded the crap out of this guy. And everyone's been talking about it since, right? Watching him stutter, watching this guy get phased. It was like a real mauling. It was like a real heavyweight fighting a featherweight and just pounding them around the ring. And it was kind of funny, right? If you like that kind of thing. It was a funny show. But now that Russell Brand, if you didn't see the video, the basic thrust of it is the MSNBC guy goes with the cliche on the left, which is Fox News is the only brainwashing propaganda entity in the world. Now, we're not denying Fox News is a brainwashing entity. It is a propaganda outlet. It has always been catering to its audience. It's always been giving its audience what it likes to hear. And people like confirmation bias. They like narrative bias. They don't want to hear the truth. CNN is dealing with all kinds of fallout now because for a little bit they tried to go with the truth when they had their big purge of old talent and new people and all that kind of stuff. But it hasn't really worked out for CNN. Everyone's complaining now because they want the constant Trump is a terrorist and all this stuff. So now the whole debate that was on the Bill Maher show really was around this guy calling Fox News propaganda. And in those circles, it usually doesn't get any pushback. If you're in your echo chamber, you can just say something like that, right? Fox News is a propaganda outlet, and the ones I watch aren't. You can say the same thing if you're a Fox News person in an echo chamber, right? You can say, oh, MSNBC and CNN are just propaganda, and no one will push back, right? No one will say, well, so is Fox News, right? It's normal. It's on both sides. But that's what makes Russell Brand so effective. He doesn't come from either of these poles. He might get things wrong, but we can at least acknowledge that he's trying to seek out what he thinks is the truth and what he thinks is credible. So when he pushed back against the MSNBC writer and host, the guy wasn't expecting it or wasn't ready for it and just took a couple of straight punches to the face. And that's what made it so funny. But because it has gone so viral, the idea of putting Fox and MSNBC on the same plane hasn't really gone over the echo chamber line before to this extent, because of course Bill Maher's show is one of these shows whose audience I would say is more on the left. They're used to bringing on MSNBC folks. I doubt they ever bring anyone from Fox, for example, on, or if they do, it's in a different context. So this Russell Brand appearance was out of the ordinary, and for the first time, people who are captive to that audience heard something they hadn't heard before. And that's what's made it so effective. But Mehdi Hasan on MSNBC, you can see, is already pushing for an alternative point on this and to sort of tear down some of the effective blows that Russell Brand landed. And here's what he says on Joy Reid's show, right? Mehdi Hasan, who I think we can all acknowledge, we've mentioned him many times on the show, he is as much of a propagandist as anyone on Fox. And indeed, we do believe what Russell Brand said, that Fox and MSNBC are as propagandist in nature as each other, right? They're equally propagandist. So here's what Mehdi Hasan says. He goes, we've got to stop legitimizing this stuff as news. We have to make the point that this is a propaganda organization, not a news organization. So you can see already here, this is how the sausage is made, everyone. This is exactly how it's made. We saw a whole point of view come into play. Here, I'm going to try something with, I don't know why, but it looks like I'm staggering a little bit, and I'm going to do a little thing here. Tell me how it works out with the connection. I'm going to go to the other signal. That should make it a little more consistent. Let me know how the audio is going again this morning, guys, and all that stuff, because we're still trying to experiment. We think we got it. We think we've solved it. But anyway, so Mehdi Hasan clearly trying to counter the narrative that Russell Brand has lobbed in there, which has been so effective. It's like, when you shoot a bomb from the outside, remember what was that movie? Armageddon, with Bruce Willis. It was in the 90s, Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck, and there was an asteroid headed to Earth, and the whole concept of throwing or shooting a nuclear bomb at it, it would just deflect. So they had to go inside, and they got oil riggers, drillers to drill inside the asteroid and then blow it up from the inside, because throw a firecracker at something was the analogy they used. It would just bounce off, put a firecracker in someone's hand, and it forces you to open it up. That's kind of what Russell Brand did, right? He was able to effectively enter an echo chamber and detonate a mind-blowing bomb that has forced counter narratives to come to light, right? Audio not bad today, Joe says. So far, 5 on 5. Okay, great. Excellent, guys. Perfect. So that's why you start seeing these counter narratives. And now everyone even pushing back on this MSNBC guy, right? So here's what he said even in this interview. He says, John Heilemann is his name, claimed to Bill Maher on Friday night that he always took the COVID lab leak theory seriously, when, of course, here's him in May 2020 calling it made up and a conspiracy theory. And that's kind of the dilemma that a lot of these folks in the echo chambers are dealing with right now. the track record is there, and we're able to go back and look at it. And more people are saying, well, what the hell's going on here? Because COVID affected so many normal people's lives, there's a higher proportion of people now interested in finding out if they were bamboozled or lied to. Some yes, some no, of course. But in this case, what we've got is a pretty big, let's call it collection, pretty big track record now of facts and stakes in the ground that allow us to forensically very easily go back and analyze. And here's what we now know, right? Here's what we now know. Here's what's come to light in the past few days about lab leak and Fauci and the narratives and everything that's going on. So this is from Kanekoa the Great, Kanekoa Substack. He says, number one, Dr. Fauci covertly crafted the influential proximal origin paper that solidified the natural origin theory and dismissed the lab leak as a conspiracy theory, thereby giving MSNBC and folks like Heilman their talking points. He concealed his funding of gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab by deceiving the world. Malcolm Flex, who, if you don't follow Malcolm Flex on Twitter, you really should. He's another one of these bro science guys, really great. And a good follow. Here's him keeping score of everything that went on with Dr. Fauci. And I think it's a really good scorekeeping. So he says, one, went against federal order against gain-of-function research by funneling the money through EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak. This would be the origin of the virus, which killed millions globally, wrecked several economies, and affected election outcomes due to inconsistent voting measures adopted per state in response. Two, lied to Congress about gain-of-function research overseas several times, despite having been the key progenitor of it during the outbreak from Wuhan and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Three, lied about being involved in the research paper which investigated the lab leak when he was the one who prompted and urged the writing of it on a conference call days before it came out. Four, decried the ideas of travel bans in China in the initial stages, which was also echoed by Dr. Birx. Later reversed course on travel bans from African nations in the midst of Omicron after being against them. Five, lied and reversed positions several times on masking for dubious at best reasons. And now, I was one of the first people to say when he first came out with the masks don't work thing, it was a scam. I said, what are you talking about? Now, I don't think masks as a policy objective work because you don't get compliance. And even just look at how schools masked up, right? The minute they walked out of the class, the kids took the masks off and were all over each other. So you've got to take human nature into consideration when you're thinking about mask policies. It's not just mask, yes, mask, no. The idea of just a mask in isolation, of course it works, right? It's just friction. It's just a barrier. Now you see things come out. How effective is it? I don't know, but any friction is something, right? So the minute he came out with it, now I'm not asking for, I disliked the masking policies more than anyone, right? I didn't put my kids, they had one thing that required them to wear a mask once a week for a half an hour during the whole COVID. And even that I found unacceptable. So definitely not for mask lockdowns or mask mandates, but I mean, let's just be honest, masks, any amount of friction works, right? So the minute he came out with it, I said, well, what's going on here? Like, I would like a mask, right? And this was in March 2020. And, I made, the cloth masks, and a lot of people were doing that back then. But anyway, you could tell he was lying back then. And that, at the time I called him a liar even then. And that was early 2020. I said, this guy's lying. This is good. Now, was there a supply glut? Was there a problem? Pardon me, not a supply glut, but a supply deficiency of masks? Yes. Did they want them to go to the first responders and the people on the front lines? Yeah. Like, I get why they made the choice, but I didn't need to be lied to, right? I didn't need to be lied to. Next, promoted lockdowns until the production of a vaccine, despite knowing the deleterious effects of an entire generation of children's literacy. 7, consistently shot down the ideas of other interventions in lieu of the vaccine, which he knew or should have known did not prevent transmission. 8, continued to perpetuate the idea of lockdowns even after acknowledging demonstrable human cost and the anti-scientific nature of their efficacy. 9, pushed the idea of vaccinating children as young as 4, despite the obvious risks of introducing vaccinations to youth needlessly, regardless of risk factors. He says, I'm probably missing something there. But at the same time, there's too many reasons for why this man should be fired and arrested. And then Malcolm Flex says, then again, AG Garland is the person in charge of this, so I wouldn't expect much. So again, the paper was created, right? We see it from all the investigating that's gone on from the New York Post now, and this proximal origin paper. So I think Fauci's lies are now really difficult to ignore, and we'll see where it goes. But nevertheless, it created a framework for normal people to start off-ramping from the trust the experts, listen to the science, follow the science. We've said many times on this show, um, follow the science is the dumbest phrase that you can utter these days. There's nothing stupider than saying follow the science. There's just nothing stupider, right? And this could be one of the ways that we can disarm that statement, right? Follow the science. We have to disarm it because it is such a bludgeon tool, and it really smashes a lot of people who are in the echo chambers because it seems reasonable, right? Follow the science. I follow science. No. It takes a lot to understand that science is not a religion. Science is simply a framework for thinking, and it rarely is that effective when it comes to breaking down complex systems in the sense that we can have replicatable, provable results that come out of using the scientific method to look at whatever the problem is. Just for example, with masks, you can't really do a scientific study on masks because the control group is absolutely impossible to recreate. You don't have compliance because of human nature. Did families in their houses wear masks? Of course not. Of course. I mean, some crazy people did, but the compliance on that was probably zero. So comparing a mask in lab settings with a controlled environment and control groups is totally different than masks out in the wild with human beings using them, right? They're not the same thing. So following the science means you have to, in this case, accept that you can't use science to measure masks. There's just no way to do it. And that's why I've said for a long time that COVID did something unexpected, which is it proved science itself was broken. It proved science was broken, right? The scientific method now used as a brainwashing tool when it was not supposed to be that, right? The people in the Enlightenment who came up with the scientific method and thought it would change the world never expected these results. But here we are. Here we are. But it's not over there, right? So we still get, and today's show is really about, I think in the past couple of days, I think World War III might have been lost by USA Inc. It might have been lost, and I'm going to try and build up the case as we go here. A little bit of a slow burn on what's going on. So right away, trust the science, trust the experts. Between what Russell Brand did, detonating that Armageddon bomb inside the echo chamber, finally getting people to talk about the propagandist nature of both left and right-wing media outlets, and bludgeoning this idea that you can, with cliches, just dismiss Fox News while thinking MSNBC and CNN are somehow better or more righteous or more true, right? It's just not the case. And the next story, which is all about Tucker Carlson, got the 40,000 whatever hours of video of January 6th. And now we're starting to see that every single piece of the narrative we were told about January 6th isn't true. Now, we've seen the QAnon shaman, right, who was turned into a real villain on the mainstream media because of his outlandish clothes. Inside of the Capitol buildings, if you haven't seen the video yet, you can see that he was recorded everywhere he went. And he was regularly escorted by 1, 2, 3. At one point, there's something like 12 police around him, and they're just chatting. They're trying to open doors for him. They're trying to show him around the place. There's even a video of him when he's at the magic lectern, when he's doing when if you believe the conspiracy, he is taking control of the greatest military force the world has ever known because he's occupying the Senate chamber and he's on the speaker's platform, which bestows upon him all the nuclear codes, right? Because he's then able, I suppose the narrative is, he's able to break all the cryptographic security around them, and they just give it to him. He's there. Here's the keys to the kingdom. You get it all, buddy. You're there. You got the clothes. You got the magic. It's ready to go. And what had them so afraid? Well, he actually prayed. There's a video of him praying when he's up there, Heavenly Father. He didn't use the one that they say everyone in England is all about, right? That's causing a conniption about "O Mother who art in heaven." He used "O Father," and Heavenly Father, and prayed for the people, prayed for America, prayed for everyone in the room, right? And now he's in jail for 4 years, by the way. 4 years he was convicted of. Imagine 4 years when police walked him around the whole place, and he's been caught praying in the Senate chamber, committed no violence that I can see, and none that Tucker Carlson showed. So Cernovich says Tucker's January 6th reporting in a single episode is more significant than anything seen in the last 2 years. Now we know why they hid the footage. What a disgrace. And what I think is amazing here is the line I've been using to describe January 6th comes all the way back from Norm Macdonald. Now, Norm Macdonald, I never met him. He's dead now, unfortunately. I still think he is one of the funniest people that ever lived. We do have a bit of a connection in that he is a English Quebecer, just like me. And there aren't many of us. There aren't that many English Quebecers, and we have a type of kinship. So I always got his jokes. I always understood him, I think, a little better than or maybe not understood him. I had a connection to him that was a little different than most people. So when I was a teenager and he was on Saturday Night Live, there was kind of a tribal connection to the guy. He grew up in Quebec City. He grew up in Montreal. I lived right around him. I was talking about the Citadel yesterday. He's from the same city where I went to law school. It is a Citadel. And one of his parents was a teacher there. So I've always followed him. I've always enjoyed his politics. I've always thought of him as one of the smartest, most clever, not just comedians, artists in the world. One of the rare, true artists in the world. You know, one of his funniest jokes, he's talking with, what's his name? He's on, the one with Jerry Seinfeld where you go driving and comedians have a coffee and drive in a car or whatever it's called. And what's his name? Someone is telling him about the Bill Cosby thing, right? And Patton Oswalt, right? Patton Oswalt is saying, what really bugs me about this Bill Cosby story is the hypocrisy. And so you get Norm Macdonald with Jerry Seinfeld telling him about the Patton Oswalt story. And he goes, yeah, I disagreed with him. Right. And you get Jerry Seinfeld going, you disagreed with Patton Oswalt about the worst thing about Bill Cosby. And he goes, yeah, I thought it was the drugging and the raping. The hypocrisy. Come on. It's so good. It's so good. He's one of the funniest. So Norm Macdonald had it right from the first moment. He tweeted this, and he must have been on death's door at the time, right? So he's still there dying, watching the whole thing. And remember, he performed the night of the lockdowns in New York City and had one of the greatest sets you've ever seen in your life. I encourage everyone to go back and watch it because he was a bit of a health hypochondriac. He was always going to the doctor, always convinced he had this or that or cancer or whatever it was. He had a lot of problems, and he admitted it. He had a lot of anxiety around his health and potentially dying young. So he must have been on death's doorstep. But here's what he wrote on January 6th, 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So just as the whole thing is melting down and getting super crazy. And he says, I loved when the violent terrorists made sure to respect the velvet ropes in Statuary Hall. And you can see it in the January 6th videos that were released yesterday from Tucker Carlson. The number of people who were just there as tourists. They were in reverence for the building. You see people cleaning up messes that there were definitely some people breaking windows and being crazy. But most of the people you can see in the video that Tucker released, picking up the mess, cleaning up anything that went wrong. Now, remember that the reason why it was called the Big Lie in the first place is because the people who were there were not performing an insurrection. They were protesting an insurrection. That's what they believed, right? They believed the vote had been stolen and they were there to protest. So to make them, and remember, it's the first time Republicans have showed up to an insurrection without any guns. There's no guns involved in the insurrection. Remember that. So Norm Macdonald had it perfect. You never need to know more than what Norm Macdonald tweeted at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time on the day of the riots in the Capitol. You didn't need to know more than that. He had it right from the first moment. Everything else was propaganda that came after. Everything else was propaganda that came after. So Norm Macdonald accurately predicted the whole thing. Here's another thing that we've got that was never even brought up. That and one of the other videos we saw is one of the Capitol police officers who was told to stand down and wait outside, sitting there saying 46 or no 45 has been set up. 45 has been set for the number that President Trump is, the number of his presidency. 45 has been set up. Here's what happened right after. Not a lot of, I didn't even know this. This was in February of that year, that 92% of the US Capitol Police Union chief members voted no confidence in the way the whole situation was handled. They believe it was a orchestrated event, and they tried to protest then. And here's what Cernovich retweeted today. Nearly all Capitol Police Union members voted no confidence in their leadership over the poor handling of January 6th. It will be interesting to hear what some of the Capitol Police officers on duty have to say about this, if we ever hear those hearings, of course, right? So that's where we're left, right? That's where things are with our media. We can see it in the Fauci files. We can see it in everything that Fauci did now to hide his to cover up his involvement in this global catastrophe, in the lab leak theory, in many of his policies. And now with the January 6th story, of course, it's the same thing. You even get CNN trying to say Tucker Carlson tries to sanitize the very real violence of January 6th by portraying it as a peaceful protest. And of course, this is Oliver Darcy, who is a propagandist and who does this professionally, right? He does this for a living. So where does that leave us, right? Again, today the story is about how the All Lies, this whole industrial complex, probably may have, in the past few days, yesterday being an important inflection point, lost World War III. I think they did. And here are here's the other side, right? Everything is Newtonian physics in the end, action, reaction, right? It's all Newtonian physics. And the reaction now abroad is very interesting. We had several statements yesterday from major leaders in Russia and in China that are very abnormal, very abnormal. I think they sense that the U.S. Edifice is starting to deteriorate, and by edifice, I mean the institutional propaganda storyline that's being projected into the minds of Americans is cracking. At least they believe it. And I'm mind reading a little bit here, right? This is a bit of mind reading, but this wasn't an accident. You had Xi, Putin, and Medvedev all speaking out yesterday. And what did they all say? Interesting stuff, right? So again, these are propagandists themselves. I am in no way saying that Xi is someone you should follow or Putin is someone you should follow. My framework for World War III is all of these nation state creations are up against individual rights, individual liberties, and World War III is really about people versus countries themselves. So I put Russia, CCP, and USA Inc. into the same boat, right? They would have us divided and fight each other, but nevertheless, the people can come together. Now, these leaders are strategically talking this way, but it doesn't mean they're wrong, right? So it doesn't mean that Xi and Putin are wrong. But here's what Putin said yesterday. Or no, sorry, this is not yesterday. This is from a little while ago, but Medvedev spoke yesterday. So he says, let me repeat that the dictatorship of the Western elites targets all societies, including the citizens of Western countries themselves. This is a challenge to all. The complete renunciation of what it means to be human, the overthrow of faith and the traditional values, and the suppression of freedom are coming to resemble a religion in reverse. Pure Satanism, he says. Exposing false messiahs, Jesus Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount, by their fruits ye shall know them. These poisonous fruits are already obvious to people, and not only in our country, but also in all countries, including many people in Western countries themselves, right? So that was Putin talking about this. He goes, now he gets into unipolar hegemony, anti-colonial movement, his power growing, or the power of the anti-colonial movement growing over time, right? Maybe, I'm not sure if Putin is around for the whole story, right? I'm not sure he makes it to the end of the line here. But that's one thing that he said, right? And it's interesting. But here's Medvedev yesterday. He says, the sharp blade of geopolitical turbulence has cut open an abscess of the old problems of our world. The time has come for international surgery to remove the malignant tumor of the colonial past. The main reason that truly sovereign states are no longer afraid of the dictates of the notorious collective West. The new multipolar world will be much more difficult than a bipolar or unipolar dictate. Dictate is an important word here, right? We talk about fiat being another definition of dictate. We like this scheme. For Russia, there are no forbidden regions for dialogue since we have never had colonies, which is not exactly true. And if the Soviet Union actively contributed to the death of the colonial system in the world, now we, together with other countries, can drive the last nail into the coffin of the neo-colonial aspirations of the Western world. But that's not even nearly the most important thing that happened yesterday. The most important, so you get Russia consolidating their narrative, fighting their narrative. This is a psychological battle. It is an economic battle. These are their psychological attacks, right? These are their psychological projections that they're pushing out there. But here's the more interesting one, and this is something you don't hear often, ever. And we've got Arnaud Bertrand, who is taking this out of a Wall Street Journal article from yesterday. The title is China's Xi Jinping takes rare direct aim at U.S. in speech. And so Arnaud breaks it down. He goes, to my knowledge, this is an unprecedented statement by Xi. Western countries, led by the U.S., have implemented all-around containment, encirclement, and suppression against us, bringing unprecedentedly severe challenges to our country's development. And then Arnaud is saying, this is him telling the Chinese people that China is under attack by the West as a whole, led by the US, which is factually undeniable, of course. But him saying it out loud marks a real turning point. It probably means he's lost hope that a new Cold War can be avoided. And underneath it, he says, unlike Western politicians, Chinese leaders err on the side of understatement and indirectness when discussing external threats, nor are they fond of using it to justify policy. So Arnaud Bertrand says, it takes a lot for a Chinese leader to be so blunt publicly. In fact, I don't think it's happened since Mao, so half a century. They must really be at the end of their patience, right? They must really be at the end of their patience. And why would they be at the end of their patience, right? How have they got this far? How did we get to the point where we're listening to Xi say these things? Well, it could be the lab leak. It could be all the stuff we're hearing about Taiwan. It's very easy for Xi to imagine Taiwan and Ukraine being similar here. And now you get all kinds of people talking about arming Taiwan. Now, there's another article in the Wall Street Journal today that I think gives excellent context on all of this. And it's from, I didn't get it's at M. Gordon WSJ. But I've got Eldridge Colby here who does the breakdown. So he says, and this is now, remember, we've heard everything yesterday from Xi. We heard from the Russians as well. We've got the Fauci stuff, which we don't know all of it, but it's not the official narrative, right? It's not the official story. That's changed. That's garbage. January 6th as well. All of that looks exactly like a color revolution. You know that. We've talked about it a lot on the show. Color revolutions that America has exported for many years all look the same. You create an uncertain election, you fund one side, make sure they're on the moral high ground, and then use that as a cover to go in and manipulate the democracy and install the person you want, right? This has been going on for years and years and years. And so January 6th shows that this has come to America, and America is dealing with it itself. So here's the article that Eldridge Colby in the WSJ and the Wall Street Journal. Both of these are from the Wall Street Journal. The one about Xi saying to America and being blunt, forget it, we're not going this way anymore. And now this one, right? This one is very interesting. It says, the U.S. is not ready for the era of great power conflict. And the key takeaways are 5 years ago, after decades of fighting insurgencies, the U.S. started tackling an era of great power competition with China and Russia. It isn't yet ready, and there are major obstacles in the way. So he goes on to describe those major obstacles. Despite an annual defense budget of more than $800 billion, the shift has been delayed by a preoccupation with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the pursuit of big-ticket weapons that didn't pan out, internal U.S. government debates over budgets, and disagreement over the urgency of the threat from Beijing, according to the current and former U.S. defense officials and commanders. Continuing concerns in the Middle East, especially about Iran and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, have absorbed attention and resources. Corporate consolidation across defense industry has left the Pentagon with fewer arms manufacturers. Shipyards are struggling to produce the subs they need to counter China's larger naval fleet. Weapons designers are rushing to catch up with China and Russia on hypersonics. The U.S. military's success in the Mideast came in part from air superiority and a less well-equipped foe. A conflict with China would be very different. The U.S. Asian bases and ports under attack would need to support its forces over long, vulnerable routes. In a conflict with China, if a conflict with China gave Russia the confidence to take further action in Eastern Europe, the U.S. and its allies would need to fight a two-front war. Now, you do know that the entire U.S. Organizing principle is so that they can fight two wars on two different fronts across the planet. So him saying it here, I wouldn't totally agree. American military systems are designed specifically for this, to have two major theaters of battle around the world, right? So, but what he goes on to say is that they're basically just not ready for this, right? They have not calibrated themselves to this. They cannot have a hot war. And I don't even think, this article goes on and on about just the military aspect. The military aspect is only one part of it. The psychological aspect is another. Everything we've learned about Fauci, everything we've learned about follow the science, trust the science, everything we've now learned about American intelligence agencies targeting Americans, using tools of propaganda, launching a color revolution in our own country, means the will of Americans to participate in these things is way, way down. Right? It's nowhere near what it used to be. So you can start to get explanations for things like this. Right now, this is one of the funniest things I've read in a long time, and has everything to do with what Zelensky said the other day about once the money runs out, Americans are going to have to send their sons and daughters to Ukraine to fight and die. He said it, right? So Zeke Arkham, right? Zeke Arkham writes this on Twitter yesterday. Dear Ukrainian flag people, they're starting to be known as the Ukrainian flag people. I'm down for that, right? The Ukrainian flag people. So he says, Zelensky just said your children will be fighting the Ukrainian conflict if his army should fall. Make sure you sign your kids up right now. Want to make sure your support is more than just a flag next to your name or on your house. He's going to need you all in. Certainly ain't going to be my kid, but I'm just a non-supportive heathen. So I'm just continuing my behavior. You are a supporter, so jump right in. And eventually it's going to have to get to that point, right? It has to. It has to get to that point. And it's not just there, right? You've got the UK dealing with its own thing about the lockdown files and all the propaganda that went on there. When should we release the new variant? We're going to scare people, right? The Matt Hancock, I think is his name, who was the health minister at the time. Now, remember, there's as much distrust and as much awareness about propaganda in the UK. Russell Brand being one of the big alarm bell ringers, right? He's been focused on the UK situation as much, if not more, than he has been on the American situation, right? It was just 1 week in America that he caused all of this uproar and stuff. He's back in the UK now, I think. But here's what the government is saying currently. Tobias Elwood, head of the British Parliament's Defence Committee, says just yesterday, Britain should engage directly in war against Russia. We are at war in Europe. We need to move to martial law. What kind of appetite is there in the United Kingdom for more lockdowns and martial law in the UK? So here, Richard says on Twitter, step by step, the people of the UK are being prepped for war along the same lines that they were before. So you get all of that stuff going on, right? And you've even got now another example of American propaganda. There was a bunch of Antifa that attacked a police thing in Georgia yesterday. The New York Times writes the following, right? Protesters damage property. They've been charged with terrorism. They call them protesters. So was it protesters in January 6th or was it terrorists? Was it protesters that shot and used fireworks and all that kind of stuff yesterday? One of them being a Southern Poverty Law Center attorney, right? So we've talked a lot about how the entire edifice of experts and NGOs and everything that was built after World War II to perpetuate American culture and really to feed a bureaucracy that was credited with winning World War II and seems to have an unlimited amount of resources because of the fiat system they helped implement around the world through their victory. Now, finally being criticized, finally being exposed. And this article has been shared widely for those reasons. The actual headline is the following: hundreds of activists breached a forest site being developed into a police and fire training complex in Atlanta. They burned vehicles in a trailer and set off fireworks at officers stationed nearby. The police said they detained 35 people so far. Imagine, they call them activists and protesters. Now, they're being indicted as terrorists, so that is probably a good thing. But remember, the prediction of the sovereign individual is that all Americans eventually will be considered terrorists if you think about this system of governments preserving themselves and, in a sense, being the enemy of the people. I was made a terrorist in Canada. I'm a, like, who isn't a terrorist these days, right? Who isn't? With the truckers, right? Of course, with the truckers. So, there's that, and then put that, all that we've heard now, the Russia, China, what's going on with the American propaganda and Fauci, and yesterday, so the media not doing its job, China and Russia upset, angry about COVID, probably about the war, probably about American efforts in Taiwan being similar to those in Ukraine. And yesterday, the German Chancellor Scholz came to America. Right, he came and met with Biden in the Oval Office. They had a meeting. They sat at the chairs, but of course, there was no questions from reporters. None. Why? Why were there no questions from reporters? Aaron Mate breaks it down. He goes, Scholz's visit underscored that U.S. media is state media, no joint presser for obvious reasons. They can't risk a question from a German reporter about Seymour Hersh's Nord Stream scoop. Everybody here got the memo. No U.S. outlet covering Scholz's visit even mentioned Hersh's story. Oh. Why is this all gummed up? Don't know why that got all gummed up on my camera. Did you guys hear a lot of that, or was the audio coming through? I don't know what just happened. Audio is good? Okay, yeah. I don't know why my whole screen just paused for a second. So as long as the audio is good, we're okay. I think I covered it. So this German case, right, is important, right? It shows that, heard it, okay, good. It shows that the U.S. media is absolutely in freeze cam, heard it all. Okay, great. It just shows that the U.S. media is still controlled. It is still a trained dog. It is still not to be trusted. Isn't technology fun? Yeah, fucking hate it. Yeah. Just hate it. But here's the context of that, and this can go. It's not just the media, right? It's not just the media. Here's the fallout of Nord Stream, and this is true, right? This is from the other day, from CNBC. The Russia-Ukraine war remapped the world's energy supplies, putting the U.S. at the top for years to come. That's exactly what happened. Right? U.S. energy companies, I've said it on this show since the Nord Stream bombing, since the day of, what I saw was U.S. energy companies backstopping a military effort, which would be a windfall for them. It's a windfall for them, right? They get all of the business that Russia had cultivated in Germany, all of the business that Russia had cultivated in those parts of Europe, That's a huge market. Look what they're charging people. Why do you think we've got our own propaganda now about propane stoves being bad for your health? I'll tell you why. There's a better market for them to sell it abroad than here domestically. Americans don't have an appetite to pay for this much for energy because we still do have a better energy matrix than anyone in the world, and it isn't even close. Right? We do. That's just the reality. And now, in many ways, the U.S. energy companies, you can say, run the world. I mean, you can even say it. They run the world, right? Um, but that's good news for Bitcoiners. Why? Well, here's what happened yesterday, right? Here's what happened yesterday. A new nuclear reactor in Pennsylvania just reached its critical, I forget what they call it. I had a tweet here that put that in. Anyway, it reached its, whatever the actual term is, when a nuclear, there's a specific nuclear um, um, energy term that would be used here. But anyway, this one is this nuclear reactor online yesterday has a tenant to load balance the energy, and that's TeraWulf, who is a Bitcoin miner. So this new nuclear reactor, brand new, America's first new nuclear reactor in decades, reached critical. There's a word for it. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what it is. But now we have the first ever 100% nuclear powered Bitcoin mine in America. The first. So on the same day that the credibility of the elections, of Fauci, of trust the science, of the president, the leader of the free world who won't take any questions about military involvement in the Nord Stream pipeline, who dodges questions, the same day foreign leaders are heavily and openly criticizing America at a tone and a pace that we're not used to. And here acknowledging that U.S. energy companies are the top of the heap. The path for hyper-Bitcoinization has never been more clear. It's never been more clear. The U.S. energy companies are not necessarily beholden to the U.S. economic system. If the war and all these things actually affect the bottom line, they can change their tune real quick. Bitcoiners, to get control of all this stuff, don't need to infiltrate governments, and we don't need to infiltrate the Federal Reserve and all of these other institutions. We just need to make energy companies richer, American energy companies richer. How? Helping them build more facilities, helping them build more load capacity. And if we do that, suddenly who's been acknowledged to be running the world can be run by us, can be run by Bitcoiners. And we're not that far from it. We're not that far. And the good news is, even within the context of the nuclear energy revolution in America, which I think is going to become much more proliferate, you're going to have way more capacity, many more nuclear reactors going online, all of those things, we're even embracing the comedy, right? We're starting to really be able to make fun of clown world in ways that we haven't before. Remember what I predicted about the big boob Canadian teacher, the shop teacher, right? I predicted when that story broke in the autumn as well. Go back and fact check it. You'll see I said many times, I think this guy's a troll. I think this is a troll, right? There was even something on 4chan that said students in the class knew he was totally a based guy, was sick of it, and started wearing the mega boobs to school to provoke a reaction and to see what kind of outcome. So they caught this guy now because he never wears the big boobs in his private life. He only wears them to school. So they fired him, which was, I think, always the goal, right? I think this guy always wanted to get fired. And I think now that he's got his wish, we're going to see big changes there, which would be hilarious. And again, Canada can be one of the dumbest countries in the world. But in many ways, it's ahead of the United States in this conversion, in this change, in its perceptions about government. I thought myself personally, who worked for Stephen Harper in the previous administration, pre-Bitcoin, thought we were already the precursor to this whole MAGA thing and everything that was going on. We were totally different in some ways, but we were irreverent, we were populist, we were out of nowhere and very different. You had, of course, Mayor Rob Ford, who came not long after that, who was also part of this new trajectory. Probably the only way you can deal with the follow the science pronoun in their bio Ukraine flag crowd is with this kind of irreverence and with this kind of gamesmanship, with the big boob guy being hilarious. I mean, imagine that this person can now get a reward for this troll. It's the greatest troll of all time. And you had to have seen it, right? A shop teacher in a high school. Like, how many shop teachers do you know that were funny in this kind of way? I mean, this is one of the great pranks of all time. Of all time. Everyone getting that, people even took the big boob teacher seriously. Look what's happening, right? This was the best way. This is the same thing that Russell Brand did. This is exploding it from the inside, right? It's exploding it from the inside. So very funny. But here's another one. This is hilarious. You got a guy named Ben Bankus, right? Ben Bankus, who's running now for mayor of Toronto, right? So in the great tradition of Rob Ford, he's going to ban male sports. So there's going to be no more NBA team. He's going to replace it with 2 WNBA teams. You got to see he does the whole thing with one of these masks that's cut out for his mouth so he can talk, but he's got a mask all around. He wants a ban on the viewing and enjoyment of male sports. He's gonna what else did he say? Anyway, I think he's going to win. It's a comedian who can win. I think we should flood our political ranks with these comedians, with irreverence, with people who are ready for change. And I think we're going to get somewhere, right? I think we're going to get somewhere. So there you go. That's our show for today. I hope I covered everything. I think I did. I had a few more stories here. You know, the woolly mammoth is coming back. Should be in 4 years. We should have a woolly mammoth. Golden age incoming, guys. Woolly mammoths. We're going to be living up north again, right? Nuclear's answer for energy. Voyager 1 has been operating on RTGs for 45 years, 6 months and a day. Yeah, I mean, some of these ones, like and I was talking about AOC coming over to the nuclear side the other day. Again, it's another one of those from the inside, right? She saw what was going on in France and in Japan and said, awesome. So if he keeps the jugs on all the time, it would have been fine. Yeah. If he would have kept the big boobs on, he'd have been fine, right? P-Man Van, does he say anything about banning white people? I don't think so. I'm sure he will soon. He had more. Unfortunately, I had trouble copying them because he didn't really leave them up on the video long enough, and I was just unable to get them. You should go watch it, though. It's a hilarious video, really hilarious. If he would have kept the boobs on, he'd have made it. Yeah, he'd have made it. Which I think is funny. Also, there is actually an aircraft carrier being sunk. Brazil is scuttling an old one. What a crazy thing. No, I'm still calling, like, an aircraft carrier being sunk, sure. I'm still calling an active one sinking into the sea, and it's going to be with the F-22s and the F-35s on the deck. That's the real image. Watching the F-35s and their billions of dollars just sink in because someone sent a swarm of drones that cost collectively $100,000 maybe, and they wipe out billions. You know, how many can they fit onto the deck of an aircraft carrier? I don't know, 20 maybe. I have no clue. I've seen Top Gun, and that's all my experience on aircraft carriers. But I think it's going to happen. I think you're going to see it. Yeah, Bitcoin goes nuclear. Made my day yesterday reading that. Yeah, isn't it amazing? I mean, honestly, that's the key here, guys. It really is the key. The energy companies are going to be the big winners of all of this fighting. And they already are. All we need to do is make them win again, right? Make the energy companies successful and all that. I got to get out of here. Yeah. No, you got help on the way in Canada, man. You got help on the way. I think, look, you know, I don't know if Canada survives. I don't know if Canada survives it, but who cares? Canada is just a contract between these states, and it was always a shitty deal. If Quebec forces a new contract and a new form of federalism arises, which I think is likely, right? The capacity of the federal government to continue to um, subordinate the provinces isn't going to last much longer, especially with Trudeau tying in health passports with a proto CBDC. I mean, Alberta has said, get out of here. It's not happening. They don't care because they're trying to pay them to do it, right? So ultimately, here's what I think is going to happen. You're going to have two renegotiations in North America, which are both U.S. federalism and Canadian federalism. I really do think you're going to have a renegotiation of the deal. And that means the relationship between Washington, D.C., the federal entity, USA Inc., and the actual individual states. Similar in Canada with the federal government and the individual states. And I think somewhere in this recalibration, the map will get redrawn, or even the map will just be not considered the same way anymore. So there's no national divorce happening in America or Canada. What there is going to be is a new contract, and it will change our perception of what all of these states are and what they mean and how they interact and how they do things. So I can even see a world where there are some Canadian provinces that become a type of hybrid or even fully US states. Right? I can't imagine Alberta staying in the deal that it's got much longer. I just can't. And I think individual Canadian provinces will all benefit from this. I don't predict any poverty and misery on the part of actual Canadians. I predict the governments will be bankrupt and finished and not be able to continue sustaining all of these ridiculous services and ideas they have. But the individual will do much better, and individual states will have the ability to renegotiate. So, P. Man Van, would you say that because the Constitution of the U.S. states? No, actually, the Canadian provinces have more power, believe it or not. It was a flip. The U.S. states became more subordinate to the federal government over time and do less stuff versus the Canadian ones. It was supposed to be the other way around. The federal government instantly at the start of Canada was supposed to be very powerful, but they gave a lot of power to the states. They delegated a lot of authority, and Quebec definitely elbowed its way into different authority and things that were unexpected. And Ontario, again, Ontario is like a country. Ontario will be fine on its own. What you think of as Canada is really Ontario. All the other stuff, there's hardly anyone there. The Atlantic provinces are a joke, right? They don't even count. They're the dumbest places. It's the reason why Canada is so corrupt and stupid, because one party has a captive audience of morons that vote for them all the time and have nothing to show for whatever they've done. The Atlantic provinces in Canada are demographically sick. They don't produce anything really, and other than the seafood industry, which is good, right? But it's all run by Ottawa and all that stuff. They have no immigrants. They haven't had any immigrants participate in that country, and since the Irish potato famines, I mean, they're barely Canada. They're just another source country for Canada. They're another source immigration population for Canadians. That's it. All the smart ones move away to Quebec, and you know how many times you go and see. You're in Toronto. Where are you from? Oh, Nova Scotia. Oh, Newfoundland. There's nothing in their home provinces for them. They're shitholes. Beautiful places, heaven on earth. If you're an agrarian, if you're into fishing and good food, they're excellent places. But if you like city urban stuff and all that, they're not for you, right? They're not for you. And so many people have left for those reasons. So they're poor, stupid, you name it, and it's the same as New England in America, right? It's a very similar effect in New England. So it's a problem. Whereas the Western provinces, I mean, they don't really have the same connection to Canada and the center as anybody else. The only reason Alberta is even in the country is because they don't have a port. If they had any form of access and they weren't landlocked, they would have been gone way before Quebec. If they were where Quebec is physically, gone. They don't need shithole Canada keeping them down anymore. As it is, they've got to beg and plead and ask their neighbors for help, and they've been ignored for 30 years, 40 years now. Why the hell should they ever give any of their neighbors the benefit of the doubt? They shouldn't, right? There is no reason to give the benefit of the doubt. The camera just froze again, I guess. Huh? Um, so the Trailer Park Boys are from. So here's what Atlantic Canada is the best at, right? And this is the truth. They are the artists of Canada. That's why they moved to Toronto to be in theater and television. That's why they moved to Montreal. That's why they moved to Vancouver. That's why they're so successful. I mean, they mostly built Alberta. Alberta is filled with the best and brightest from the Atlantic provinces. Again, I am telling you that it is heaven on earth. It is an amazing place, but not for the fiat modern world that we recognize. It was a forgotten entity and just didn't participate in Canada in any way that you would recognize as Canada. Yeah, J Rock is a PEI guy. I mean, all of them are from there. You know, it was really interesting when I was a college student. They would stay in character and go out to the bars and party all the time, and you could just meet them at the bars and party with them, and they were all themselves, right? Bubbles and everybody. It was a great show, and that's what Atlantic Canada will always be known for. Is always going to be good at. They're the best musicians in Canada. They're the most talented artists. They just had a shit deal from Ottawa, and their own governments are incompetent and stupid, and they were forgotten about for years. In a world of small governments, in a world where you're going to move to a place with a good climate, good farming, it's going to resuscitate and revitalize instantly. It was a great powerhouse 100 years ago. Now it's a joke, like a complete joke, right? You can't. I mean, just mind-boggling. They will still vote for Justin Trudeau. They will still do it. They had the worst lockdowns. You know what happened in there? You know how dumb they are? Listen to this. Imagine you had this in America during COVID, right? If you were from, so they only had 4 airports open into Canada during the real lockdowns of 2021. And if you flew from here, for example, I met some people who had to do that. They would leave Barbados. So you have to enter into Toronto or Montreal as your port of entry for airports, and you quarantine there. And then those idiots made you quarantine again when you got to the Atlantic provinces. You had to quarantine again. So these are some risk averse people. Great Bitcoiners have come from there. I've met a lot, but they're not. I mean, they would be the first to acknowledge what it is I'm saying. So, unfortunately, so Canada. Other than the Maritimes, the provinces themselves, very fully functional. Quebec is a country. It doesn't require, all it gets from the federal government is some weird deal on taxation where they have to ask for money, and they get bought off, basically. That's the only reason why they're in the country. Justin Trudeau's father created an economic formula to buy off Quebec, to keep them from complaining and whining about the Constitution more. So he takes money from the English parts and gives it. Brad Mills being one of the great Canadians, Bitcoiners from out in Cape Breton Island. There's more. Kraken had offices in Halifax for years, call center stuff. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on. All right, team. That's all I got for today. Thanks for coming. Like and subscribe. Do all those things. We love it, right? We love the support. We love that you guys come every morning. No board today, but just I'm a little sick if you haven't noticed, and I don't know what's going on. I don't normally get sick. I thought I'd kicked everything from the boat, but it might be a new thing. Every kid on the island here is sick, and one of my kids got sick again, the other one. So we're going to survive. We're going to survive. I had a bad sleep last night, even though I normally sleep excellent. I'm a great sleeper. This stuff's no fun. All right, team. Peace.